Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here with you on this very lovely spring afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today as we talk about some of nature's uninvited guests. So let's get going. First off, to start off here, let's see if we can have some, let's see, I need to shrink this. There we go. We're going to start off with some definitions here. Make sure we're all starting on the same page. So what is an invasive species? First off, on the other side of the coin is a native species. It occurs naturally in a region. It's important to note that everything is native somewhere. And within that native range, that organism plays a role in the whole circle of life. It has things that eat it, benefits that it provides within that ecosystem. On the other hand, we have non-native species. Those have been introduced to a region where they were not historically found. So, for example, most agricultural crops are non-native. Outside of their home ecosystem, they may not have much of a role, as the organisms they evolved alongside just aren't there. In many cases, there's nothing to eat it, or it may have pollen, but that pollen lacks the nutrients that the native pollinators require. I'm looking at you, dandelions. An invasive species, on the other hand, now the legal definition, there is an actual legal definition of that, is a non-native species to the ecosystem under consideration that causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. So while many people throw this term around to mean a plant that just grows out of control, this is the official legal definition. So by definition, native plants can't be invasive. And that may sound a little pedantic, but again, because of some of the legal ramifications, it's really important to make that, that distinction there. So native plants can definitely be aggressive, but because they're native, they cannot be invasive. Invasive species threaten natural areas, they damage crops, they necessitate the use of pesticides in crop production, destroy biodiversity, and can even lead to the extinction of plants and wildlife. While our main focus today is plants, invasive species can also include animals, insects, aquatic species, or pathogens. They're found in all habitats from forest to prairies, wetlands, lakes, rivers, ag fields, roadsides, home landscapes. And it's really important to note that not all non-native species become invasive. Most don't, actually. Many non-native species have had established populations in Illinois for decades without causing any major ecological or economic harm. And non-native species can provide some benefits in certain situations. So, for example, in the home landscape, non-native zinnia flowers support native pollinators. You know, I have lilacs in my yard because I love how they smell for a couple weeks out of the year, but they don't go anywhere, right? They stay in place. We don't find populations of them elsewhere. They just kind of stay where they're put and don't cause any problems. So now to start off, let's take a look at this photo here. This is an eastern bottomland hardwood forest in southern Illinois. It's early spring here, so the trees overhead don't have any leaves yet, and the sunlight can filter down to the forest floor, which allows for beautiful short-lived spring ephemeral wildflowers like Mayaples that you see here, spring beauties, Virginia bluebells. I think I see some trillium in this photo. But this is what a natural forest should look like. All right. Instead, this is what many of our forests look like. When they're taken over by invasive species like this bush honeysuckle, open areas get filled with a solid green wall. That prevents light from hitting the forest floor, eliminates those early spring plants that pollinators rely on when they're just waking up. It also makes travel more difficult for wildlife and humans too, but prevents those animals from accessing things like food, water, shelter, and pushes them into more open areas like human-occupied spaces. So where do they come from? Well, they're not new. They're an ongoing issue for natural resource managers, and we've been dealing with them in North America since European settlers arrived and brought plants and animals with them. Some were introduced intentionally for agricultural or horticultural purposes, In the 50s and 60s, government agencies actually encouraged the use of non-native shrubs like multiflora rose and autumn olive to fight soil erosion and provide habitat for wildlife. They've also used things like crown vetch along roadsides for the same thing. So how do they get here? Well, our modern global transportation system provides a lot of opportunities for invasion. Species can arrive in ship ballast, cargo containers, and plant-based packing materials, to name a few. Sometimes they're intentionally brought in as foods and medicines from other cultures, and sometimes they're brought in just because they're pretty. Many invasive species began as ornamental garden plants. Climate change also creates opportunities for species to become invasive as they seek new habitats. Invasive species can come from anywhere. They can be from other regions of North America, as well as from other continents. And it's important to note, too, that some North American species are problematic invaders in other places. The American bullfrog, for example, is invasive in South America, the Caribbean, and China. So really, they can come from all over, and it's just people's penchant for moving things around. So why do they take over? Well, we sometimes think that if there's plants and animals in natural areas, that's good, right? But not everything green is good. If you see restoration crews out removing plants, it can look harsh, but there's definitely a reason for it. Oftentimes, invasives can completely take over an area, crowding out native plants, changing the soil condition, and hogging all the sunlight. Invasive species don't behave the same way here as they do in their native habitats because they don't have predators or other population checks in place. So that makes their populations just grow out of control. Also, many invasive species are generalists. They have many food sources, or they can grow in many environments, taking food and resources from native organisms. To give you an idea of just how bad they can be, the Morton Arboretum did an inventory in 2020 of all the trees in a 7-county area around Chicago. Almost half the entire tree canopy in this region in 2020 was made up of invasive species, about 46%. The single most abundant species in the region was European buckthorn, which we'll discuss later. It was a full 36% of the total number of trees. For comparison, the next most common was a tie between box elder and black cherry at 4% each. So 36% buckthorn, and then a variety of other things that are all, less than 5% each. In other words, though, too, if you randomly selected three trees throughout this region, chances are one of them was a buckthorn. So why are they a problem? Well, it's summed up by this quotation from the Nature Conservancy's Global Invasive Species Initiative. We control invasive species because they're harming the native plants and animals we care so much about protecting. Native, non-native invasive species are one of the biggest global environmental threats, second only to habitat loss. Their damages cost the US $120 billion every year. Invasive species reduce biodiversity, they harm agricultural crops, and they damage the soil. In the photo on the bottom right is a spotted wing Drosophila, which can be a pest of fruit crops. Invasive species compete with native species for resources. If left uncontrolled, they can even lead to extinction. The American chestnut tree was once widespread in the eastern US and was a valuable part of those ecosystems and for humans. But invasive pathogens led to the near extinction of the American chestnut tree. This is kind of a cool story. They're functionally extinct, but because the pathogens can't kill the tree's underground root system, the chestnut's tree stumps can still sprout, but they inevitably succumb to the blight again. So researchers are working to breed blight-resistant trees and hope to eventually be able to restore it. So kind of a hopeful story there. Invasives make it hard to enjoy the beauty of nature and our environmental resources. They can make recreational activities difficult. The photo on the top right is a boat propeller that's been clogged with aquatic invasive weeds. And the earlier picture of honeysuckle shows how it can make hiking more difficult. They harm already shrinking native wildlife populations, including game species. And invasive plants affect native fungi populations, including edible ones like morels, chanterelles, and more. So how do we get rid of them? Well, there's many methods for getting rid of invasive species. The techniques listed here are for plants, since that's mostly what we're going to talk about today. But there's also methods of control for many other invasives like fish, insects, and disease as well. So mechanical removal means any way the plant is physically removed. This can be done by cutting, digging, pulling, etc. Generally, unless it's a fairly young plant with a shallow root system that can be removed easily, this method will be paired with a chemical approach. The downside of this method is it can really disturb the soil, bringing new weed seeds to the surface, which just exacerbates things. Depending on the plant, sometimes the resulting material can be left behind to decompose, but other times it will need to be bagged and disposed of so that it doesn't continue to produce seed. Cultural control is something like a prescribed fire, basically anything that you do culturally to try and control them. So planting other things, fires, mowing, that kind of thing. So controlled burns are an incredibly important tool. It's a natural process. It's been used going back to indigenous tribes of the area to help keep prairies free of woody incursions. Today, it can stunt and kill some invasive species, but it can also stimulate others. So it's important to know what plants you're trying to target and how they will respond. But it's still an important, useful tool that can work fairly quickly. In a large area like forest preserves, they'll burn sections every few years. So not the whole thing, just different little spots, just to make sure that the wildlife is protected and they have somewhere to escape to. The land does recover pretty quickly, with some plants sprouting within days of a burn. And it should go without saying, but this is probably not a viable method for the average homeowner, unless you have a large natural area and the knowledge and experience to do it safely. Next up is chemical control. This means using the appropriate pesticide in the appropriate amount at the appropriate time. One method is a foliar treatment, which means spraying the leaves. Typically, a low concentration of herbicide is used to attempt to coat as much of the leaves as possible. Care needs to be taken, though, to prevent overspray, which is when the chemical hits a non-target plant. So you can use a shield of some kind, sometimes like a piece of cardboard or whatever, to protect nearby plants. Timing is really important because the plant, first off, needs to have leaves, so spring or summer, and be photosynthesizing for this to work. Temperatures generally need to be above 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And for plants with waxy leaves, a surfactant, which is basically like a type of soap, needs to be included in the mix so that it will stick to the leaf. So this doesn't mean just like adding some Dawn into your mix. They're special surfactants that are made to go in herbicides. For cut stump treatments of woody plants, first you cut the plant, leaving about a 6-inch tall stump. And then an herbicide, typically one containing glyphosate or triclopyr, gets applied to the stump. You'll want to make sure to read the label for instructions on how to use these. This method makes it really easy to protect nearby plants since you're just applying it directly to that cut stump. I usually use a disposable paintbrush when I do this for easy, more exact application. It works best when the sap is flowing down to the roots, so like in the fall, but it can be used through the winter as well. It can be less effective in the spring, though, since the sap is flowing up. It all depends on the plant you're trying to control. Basal bark treatments are similar to cut stump, but you don't actually have to remove the tree first. Instead, the herbicide just gets applied to the bark of the tree from the ground level up to about 15 inches. For multi-trunk shrubs, every trunk needs to be treated, and it uses a little bit more herbicide than the cut stump treatment, but it's faster and easier since you don't have to cut the tree or the shrub first. But then you're also left with a standing dead tree, which might be undesirable in a yard. It can be used through the fall and winter, unless there is ice on the trunk. And finally, biological control is another method that's often explored at larger levels, such as forest preserves or state parks. This is where an organism like an insect is used to control invasive species. A smaller scale example of this might be using BT, which is a naturally occurring bacterium, to control insects like caterpillars and mosquito larvae. These types of techniques need to be studied extensively, though, before being used, because we want to make sure we're not setting ourselves up for larger problems down the line. So, as mentioned in the previous slide, herbicides are not the only method for removal of invasive species, and often they're not even the first line of defense. But they are another tool in our toolbox. When other methods like prevention, mechanical removal, like hand pulling or digging, have failed, it might be time to consider herbicides. When that happens, the very first thing you need to do is read the label. The label will have all the information you need on how to safely and most effectively use them. There's a lot of information on that label, but there's a few really important things to look for. The first is to make sure that the species you want to target is approved for use. Somewhere, usually toward the end, is a list of all the plant species that that chemical is good for. Trying to use it on anything else might end up being a waste of money since not all plants are susceptible to every product. Using any herbicide in a way that goes against what the label says is also illegal. The label is the law. Once you've found the correct product, the next thing to look for is the section on PPE, or personal protective equipment. This will ensure your safety while using the product. Generally, you'll always want to have on long pants, long sleeves, gloves, and closed-toed shoes. The label will tell you if you need anything else like eye protection, which is, also generally a good idea, a respirator, etc. The next thing to look for is the section that discusses how and when to apply it. Some products start to lose effectiveness if the temperature is over 80 degrees, for example, or shouldn't be used if the winds are over 15 miles an hour. The label will tell you all of this. It'll also tell you how to dispose of it afterwards if you have anything left over. All right, let's jump into now some of Illinois' least wanted. First up is garlic mustard. Garlic mustard in my area of the state is starting to bloom now. I actually saw it on a walk I was on over the weekend in a forest preserve. So it is definitely out there and coming up right now. It was first reported in Illinois in 1918. So that gives you an idea of how far back it goes here. European settlers brought it as an herb. So the leaves have a garlic or oniony flavor, thus the name. So that also makes good diagnostic, as if you take a leaf and crush it, you should be able to smell, especially in the younger leaves, that very garlicky kind of scent. This is actually one of the first invasive species I learned because it's really easy to spot in the spring. It's a biennial. So the first year it appears as a low-growing rosette. The leaves are kind of kidney shaped and they have a serrated edge, just kind of like a bread knife. In the second year, it grows taller and produces clusters of small white flowers with 4 petals. The leaves are then a little more heart-shaped, but still serrated. And again, they smell really strongly of garlic when you crush them. Later in the spring, the flowers will give way to these long, skinny seed pods that stick straight up. The seeds are really small and it produces a bunch. So many seeds. Each plant can produce over 8,000 seeds, and they spread pretty readily. Large infestations can push out native plants in the forest understory because the roots produce an allelopathic chemical that inhibits the growth of other plants around it. This chemical also destroys the beneficial mycorrhizal fungi that many plants depend on. Additionally, there are 2 butterfly species that feed on native members of the mustard family. Their caterpillars will feed on garlic mustard, but because it's chemically different from the native ones, it will basically kill the caterpillars. So it's a population sink. Studies currently being done at the university are showing that garlic mustard infestations can also lead to an increase of ticks. It's kind of weird, but hear me out. The thought that is that they increase habitat for squirrels, which are also intermediate hosts for tick diseases. So not only are there more ticks, there are more ticks that are carrying disease, right? So bad news. The plant is fortunately pretty easy to pull by hand. But this is one of those where all the plant material has to be bagged and removed from the site, because even if you pull it, the seeds can still continue to mature. So this means you definitely don't want to compost it either. And remember how we talked about biological controls? So Canada has just approved, after 25 years of research, a seed-feeding weevil to control garlic mustard. In a joint study between the University of Minnesota and the University of Toronto, the weevils are being tested to see how well they can control the spread of garlic mustard. So they're doing field trials this spring and summer. So I don't know about you, but I am anxiously awaiting those results. All right, next up is Japanese stilt grass. Fortunately, I have not had to deal with this one too much because it is mostly found in the southernmost part of the state, but also a few scattered counties throughout Illinois. It is called stilt grass because the rootlets that sprout from the nodes hang down like stilts. The leaves have a silvery appearance along the midrib due to the presence of shiny hairs. The silvery stripe is probably the easiest way to tell it apart from things like crabgrass. The leaves are lance-shaped, 1 to 4 inches long, and about a ½ inch wide. It likes disturbed areas like roadsides and fields, and it will completely take over an area within about 5 years. We think it started probably as packing material for shipping Japanese porcelain around the turn of the 20th century. And as we talked about earlier, one of the issues with this invasive is that it doesn't have any population checks. Deer don't even eat it. It increases organic matter in the soil, and it alters the pH, which will also further disrupt the natural cycles of the ecosystem. On the good side, because this plant isn't annual, if you can prevent it from producing seed, this can help eradicate it. Mowing or burning late in the season before it produces seed can help get rid of it. But if you mow it too early, this can encourage even more growth. So you got to make sure you time your treatments really well with this one. Winter creeper is next up, one of our other lovely euonymus species. It has been introduced from Asia, used as a ground cover since the early 1900s. People plant it because they like how it grows in dry, shady spots. It's evergreen, and it forms very dense mats that keep the weeds out. But these characteristics mean it can invade forest openings and margins. It will smother anything under it, especially those vital early spring ephemerals. You can see in the picture here, it has really kind of gone crazy in this section here. It can crawl across the ground or climb up trees, occasionally smothering the trees entirely. So yeah, nasty, nasty stuff. It closely resembles the foliage of vinca, aka periwinkle. It's considered invasive in like the entire eastern half of the country. So it's everywhere. For small infestations in your yard, you can pull it up by the roots and just remove it. If it's particularly bad, you'll want to cut the vines, which a weed whacker works pretty well for that. And then you can treat the stumps just after the last killing frost. So after the last frost after the frost, then you can use your weed whacker, cut them, and then treat the stumps. So it's a good one to attack in the winter when most other stuff is dormant. So because it's evergreen, it can still be susceptible. Okay, everybody's least favorite. Yes, I know it's pretty. And by me, these are just about done flowering. So depending on where you're at, you may still see these white trees that stink. Yeah, every April, they're all over. They line streets and backyards in urban areas. They also show up on roadsides, empty lots. You see them in the clover leaves on the interstate. I mean, they're everywhere. And you may also smell an awful dead fish-like smell. These are Callery pears. So sometimes you'll hear them referred to as Bradford pear. That's just a cultivar. The flowers turn into small greenish brown balls. The leaves are heart-shaped and finely toothed. Sometimes the branches are thorny. The trees were introduced to the US in the early 1900s when researchers were using them for experimentation in disease resistance of the common fruiting pear tree. They found a thornless variety through this experimentation. They took stem cuttings and later cultivated it as the Bradford pear. At first, the Bradford pear was touted as the perfect plant due to its ornamental value and was widely planted in the 1950s. But we came to find out that the tree structure is weak and it can't handle stormy weather, and those branches break pretty easily. You can see here, I took this photo just last week in my neighborhood after we had a little bit of a windstorm one evening, and you can see that branch just came right off. Fallen trees can even sprout multiple new trunks. So again, you want to make sure to remove them. Many cities in Illinois and other states no longer permit planting Callery pear. Some even offer a bounty on it, exchanging dead trees for beneficial new ones. While individual cultivars of this tree don't produce viable seeds, they can cross-pollinate. So that was the whole thing with them, is that they were supposed to be sterile, but then we found out with different cultivars, they can cross-pollinate on them, and somehow that produces a viable seed. So birds then carry these seeds to wild areas where the tree spreads easily and prevents other plants from growing. To control it, the easiest way is going to be using a cut stump treatment. So applying an appropriate product within 10 minutes of cutting the tree down, Basal bark treatments also work for small trees. And of course, our joke in the industry is the best way to prune a Callery pear is a horizontal cut about 6 inches off the ground. All right, buckthorn. Right, we mentioned this a little bit earlier. There are 2 individual species of buckthorn that are invasive in Illinois, common and glossy. It grows as a tree or a small shrub. One of the characteristics of common buckthorn is this point at the tip of the branches. You can see right there, it's got that kind of thorn where those 2 leaves are at. It's not like a sharp thorn, but yeah. It produces fruit that starts off red and then turns black. They can keep their leaves until late in the fall. If you remember from earlier, buckthorn is currently the most common tree in the entire Chicago area. Why? Well, it was brought here in the early 1800s to be used for hedges. And it turns out the qualities that make it a great hedge mean it aggressively outcompetes everything else. It creates a monoculture because of its dense shrubby nature, which prevents light from getting to the forest floor. And this prevents regeneration of oaks and other species in our woodlands. Buckthorn was also touted as a great suburban tree. It was frequently planted in neighborhoods, in front of municipal buildings, basically anywhere you'd want a nice compact tree that leaves out early in the spring and retains its leaves until late in the fall. But unfortunately, nobody realized the menace that it was going to become. It is also allelopathic, like many invasive plants, meaning it produces chemicals that inhibit the growth of other plants. And as if all this isn't bad enough, it also serves as an alternate host for oat rust and as a shelter for soybean aphid eggs to overwinter. Aside from all this, studies have shown that buckthorn leaves encourage worm activity, which means leaf litter breaks down faster than it normally would, which increases the amount of nitrogen in the soil, making it even more hospitable for new buckthorn seedlings, but less hospitable for our native insects and fungi and things that rely on that leaf litter over winter. Thankfully, common buckthorn is currently illegal to sell in Illinois and most neighboring states, but unfortunately, I have still seen supposedly sterile cultivars being sold in the nursery trade. And if we have learned anything from Jurassic Park, it's that nature always finds a way. The other bit of good news is it is fairly easy to remove. If they're small, it can be pulled or dug out pretty easily, though the soil disturbance can bring new seeds to the surface. Repeated mowing and or fires can help. And larger ones can be girdled, meaning a notch is cut around the trunk, essentially cutting off the tree's circulation. Cut stump treatments also work well. All right, next up, honeysuckle. So bush honeysuckle is a common plant name that refers collectively to 4 very similar species of non-native shrubs introduced in the US as early as 1750s. In the late fall and early spring, bush honeysuckle has green leaves when native forest plants are dormant. So that's one of the ways that you can identify it, because it's one of those things that will already have green leaves, even though everything else is maybe just getting started. This plus its height, it can grow up to about 20 feet, gives it an advantage over many native plants. Its leaves are opposite and end in a distinct point. So if you look at the leaves in the picture here, you can see opposite arrangement means you have leaves attaching to that stem directly across from one another. If it was alternately arranged, you would see it in kind of a stair-step formation. But in this case, this is oppositely arranged, so you'll see the leaves directly across the stem from one another. White or pink flowers are going to turn into red berries that the birds and other animals eat, which once again spreads the seeds with its own nice little packet of fertilizer. It will also grow just about anywhere. It doesn't care about shade, sun, wet, dry. It will grow there. It was brought to the New York Botanical Gardens in 1898, and planting was encouraged by the Department of Ag because they thought it would be great for wildlife. In the early 1900s, it was reported in the wild in Illinois, and now it's found in every county, both urban and natural areas. Many studies have been done to try to determine the effects of honeysuckle on the ecosystem. One study found that birds who nest in honeysuckle have a greater chance of predation on their nests, probably because they're being built closer to the ground because of the structure of the shrub. Another showed a decline in the number of amphibians as the amount of honeysuckle increased. So, just these weird effects that it has on other animals and plants in the ecosystem. Controlling it takes a lot of time and labor. Small plants can be pulled. They have a fairly shallow root system. Repeated use of a flame weeder on the crown can eventually kill it. Obviously, flame weeder uses fire. Please be careful. But you have to really stay on top of it to eliminate it with mechanical control. It will quickly take over disturbed areas. Cutting it once will not kill it. Remember the story of the Hydra from, Greek mythology? You cut off one of her heads and two more grow back in its place. That's this. It will continue to come back year after year, worse than before. I always say it comes back angry. So again, cut stump treatments are effective. Applying the herbicide directly to the stump within about 10 minutes of cutting. Burning bush. Yes. It's that eponymous shrub that you see everywhere because people love that bright red fall color. When it's not fall, it's still easy to identify because of those cork-like wings on the stem. The leaves are small, less than about 2 inches long, elliptical, and finely toothed. The flowers are generally pretty inconspicuous, so you probably don't notice them. But they produce smooth reddish purple fruits, which are often spread by birds and other wildlife. It grows in many different soil types, doesn't mind shade. It can invade roadsides, forest edges, and old fields, but it also gets into undisturbed open woodland areas as well. Once established, it can create a thicket, displacing native plants. While it's not currently on the invasive species list and can be found in nurseries, it's recently been added to the not recommended list from the Morton Arboretum as well as Extension. This one can be cut or dug. For larger infestations, basil bark or cut stump treatments will also work. Here you can see one that's been pruned to within an inch of its life in a random drive-through. They're everywhere. So this is a woodland that has been invaded by burning bush. I've heard many people say, well, my burning bush isn't invasive in my yard. And while it may be true they haven't seen any unwanted seedlings pop up in their own yard, we unfortunately have no control over what the animals do. All it takes is for a bird to grab a berry and fly off to a nearby forest, and a new population gets started. This is true for Callery, Pear, burning bush, honeysuckle, and more. Heavy pruning that prevents it from setting seed can help, but all it takes is one missed seed to create problems far from your yard. And speaking of hydras, tree of heaven, or Ailanthus altissima, was originally imported to nurseries in 1748, and it sold well because it was pest-free, fast-growing, grew anywhere. In fact, the name comes from the fact that it was found growing on rocky hillsides in China where nothing else would grow. It's not shade tolerant, but it grows well in highly disturbed urban soils. Once it's established, it sends up shoots out of a dense root system, creating a thicket of itself. Cutting one just causes a bunch more to sprout. The leaves are similar to walnut or sumac. It's a compound leaf made up of smaller, oppositely arranged leaflets. So if you can see in the picture here, each of those, they look like individual leaves, but they are leaflets. And that stem in the middle, that's the petiole, the place where all the little leaflets are attached. And each one of those is one leaf. So again, walnut, sumac, same kind of setup where we call that a compound leaf. But unlike those, the crushed leaves have a sort of rotten peanut butter smell, which is very diagnostic. It should be noted that similar to other invasives like garlic mustard, tree of heaven produces compounds in the roots that can inhibit the growth of other plants. So it basically sets up a situation where nothing but its offspring will be able to grow. And those roots are pretty bad, causing lots of headaches in an urban or suburban setting. They'll damage sewer pipes and foundations. Fun little fact that this is the tree that was so symbolic in Betty Smith's book, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Seems to do really well in heavily urbanized areas, growing in sidewalk cracks and other pavement. If nothing else, this tree is resilient. It's also a favorite of spotter and lanternflies, so we'll talk about them in a minute, but yeah, there's that too. It's tricky to control because, as we mentioned, it is very Hydra-like. Any piece of root that is left will resprout. Even trunks that have been cut and left laying on the ground can resprout. Timing is really critical here, along with following up for the next few years. If the soil is moist and loose, small seedlings can be hand pulled. Seedlings can be easily confused with suckers, though. Root suckers will be almost impossible to pull by hand. So if you can't pull it, you'll have to treat it. Because once they get any larger, the extensive root system has to be addressed. Foliar treatments can be done during the growing season, but basal bark treatments might be easier on tall trees. So you'll want to apply herbicides when the tree is actively moving nutrients and sugars to the roots, so like late summer until fall color. On larger trees, you can use the hack and squirt method. This is where you take a small hand axe and make little cuts around the trunk. Then you'll apply a concentrated systemic herbicide to do the work. So in this case, you need to leave the trunk up instead of doing a cut stump application so the tree can continue to pull the chemicals down into the roots and kill them. Herbicides like glyphosate and triclopyr have been shown to be effective at killing the roots while having practically no soil activity, which means it's not going to move through the soil and it's not going to pose a risk to surrounding vegetation if done appropriately. It should also be noted that this tree produces a sap that contains compounds called quasinoids, which can cause heart problems, extreme headaches, and nausea. So please wear gloves and make sure to protect yourself if you are having to manage this nightmare of a tree. All right, not a plant, but I wanted to throw it in here because we do get lots of questions about it. Jumping worms are a newer invasive species that was first discovered in Illinois in 2015. Since then, they've been identified in at least 46 of Illinois', I think it's 102 counties. They eat organic matter in the soil that is needed by plants. So they live in sort of that top leaf layer and break it down really quickly. They can damage roots and kill plants. Large populations can harm the quality of the soil. I've seen them turn like nice, rich potting soil into something that resembles coffee grounds. Just really nasty, nasty things. In natural systems and forests, these worms reduce leaf litter and habitat for soil macroinvertebrates. They jump and thrash when disturbed, which is where they get their name from. And they've been used as fishing bait also because of that. So part of how they have spread was from people dumping live, like leftover bait. So don't do that. Prevention is the only known way to slow their spread at the moment. Illinois Extension does have a guide available on jumping worms if this is something you're dealing with. If it's something you think you might have, let us know, send us pictures, send us videos, and we can help you to identify. So let's talk about species of concern. So every year, the Illinois Cooperative Agriculture Pest Survey Program, easy for me to say, makes a list of most unwanted species. These are either not currently found in Illinois or only found in low numbers. They may be in neighboring areas and are at risk of becoming a problem in Illinois. And this is where you can help us out. You can download this guide, take a look at what's on here. If you see these, report them. Contact Extension, contact Department of Ag, your local forest preserve district, any of those organizations. Definitely report if you think you have spotted any of these things. And of course, one of the things that are on there, and the one we have been watching for the most, is spotted lanternfly. It is an invasive insect of fruit and ornamental and woody trees. It goes after a lot of different species. I've heard something like 70 families, I think, including grapes and hops for those who care about those crops. It's a native to China, Bangladesh, and Vietnam, and was first discovered in southeastern Pennsylvania in late 2014. It damages trees by feeding on them and then produces a waste product called honeydew that encourages the growth of mold that then harms the host plant. It also leaves that sticky film on everywhere it goes. Picnic tables, cars, it's disgusting. It could potentially devastate grape and logging industries. So bad, bad news. And it was first finally found in Illinois in 2023. We've known it was coming. We've been watching for it. It was first found in Cook County, so we are definitely keeping an eye on it, hoping we can at least delay the spread for as long as possible. Treatments are currently being explored. We don't have a good treatment for it yet, but we're doing the research. And once again, Extension has a fact sheet that is available to download and print. So keep an eye out for it. In its earlier stages, it just looks like a little black beetle with bright white polka dots on it, then turns into, I forget if it goes black one first and then red, or red and then black. Either way, it's either bright red with white polka dots, black with white polka dots, or then this is the adult form here. You can see with the wings open, it's got that, it's actually kind of pretty. I hate to admit it, but the bright red on the wings, the yellow on the abdomen there. It's kind of pretty, very unique looking. So you're really not going to mistake it for anything else. So now let's turn our attention to some things that we can replace our invasive species with. Hopefully we're removing some of these if we know we have them in our yard, and we'll be looking for good replacements for our landscaping so we don't have that kind of gaping hole. In the case of burning bush, a good replacement for that is the eastern wahoo, Euonymus atropurpurea. It's in the same genus as burning bush, but it's a native replacement. And I honestly kind of love it because it's got that great fall color, that bright red that we look for with the burning bush. But it's also got those really cool seed capsules as well. Kind of an odd shape and they look a little weird, but very fun. And like I said, it's native to our part of Illinois and makes for just a really nice replacement. Kind of depending on how you prune it, it's a small tree, like an understory sort of tree, or it can even be pruned a little bit lower so that it makes it more of like a large shrub as well. Other good replacements for burning bush include black chokeberry, serviceberry, and also ninebark. I love ninebark because it also has great fall color, more in the yellows and oranges, depending on if you get a cultivar or which kind you get. But it also has really nice structure, and the birds really seem to like it as well. It gives them some nice shelter. So again, black chokeberry, serviceberry, ninebark, and eastern wahoo, all great replacements for burning bush. Now for Callery pear, if you're removing your Callery pears, there are some other good options here depending on what you're looking for. If you like that nice early spring color, the eastern redbud is a great one. It's got pink flowers, and I really find right when I'm just dying for some color in the early part of the spring, that's when eastern redbud just really likes to show off. So it's blooming right about now-ish. We're at the end of April, so it's going now. Also, it has what I think are some pretty heart-shaped leaves. And it can be prolific. It will spread seeds, but the seedlings are easily removed if they're somewhere you don't want them to be. American plum is also similar to Callery pear in that it's blooming now. It has white flowers, and it also has a similar, though more stable shape. Makes for a nice low-growing tree, and it can sucker, which will create a small thicket, which if you're trying to make a screen or something like that, it is maybe something that you want. So again, another really great option there. I have one in my yard. The flowers smell great, and it does produce an edible fruit, but I think you might be hard pressed to fight the birds and the squirrels for them. And yes, that is a native edible strawberry. Wild strawberry is a great replacement for winter creeper. It spreads via runners that are easily tucked back into place if they start to go a little crazy. And I've always said that there's a sedge for every occasion. So in this case, if you're looking for something to fill space in a dry, shady spot, something like pen sedge, Carex pennsylvanica, or Carex rosea, rosy sedge will do well to fill in and take up space. And one of my all-time favorite low-growing little guys is pussy toes. The dark green velvety leaves are really just the best. It's a sweet little plant I've started putting between pavers, and so far it doesn't seem to mind. It's got a tiny white flower, kind of resembles cat toes. But the foliage just really adds a great texture to everything. Super low growing, as you can see in the picture here. It's really great. And it does well in medium to dry soils with part shade. So better yet, you can just intersperse all of them, and you got all kinds of interest going on here. Lots of things that you can substitute that are native instead of, the non-native things like buckthorn, honeysuckle, burning bush. Barberry is another invasive one too. So, replace any of those. There's really great native alternatives for them. And so the University of Illinois does help to work against invasives. So extension staff can provide consultations and programs for landowners and managers, and we participate in early response programs against invasion. So like I mentioned with spotted lanternfly, if you see them, you can report them to us and we will make sure the appropriate authorities get notified. Master gardener and master naturalist volunteers can help identify plants, and they also lead invasive species removal days and restorations. And university scientists conduct invasive research to combat existing invasive species and prevent future invasions. And you can see here we have some happy master naturalists after doing some great work of cutting invasives. And you can help too. So we can work together to remove and prevent the spread and introduction of invasive species, because preventing an invasive species from taking hold is a lot easier and more cost-effective than trying to control it after it's here. So for landowners and managers, be aware of local invasive species, monitor your property for them regularly, and manage them when found. If you find invasive species, you can work with neighboring property owners to help manage them together. And if you garden, make sure you get plants from trusted sources and avoid sharing landscape plants with others. I know we all love sharing our plants, but that's how jumping worm eggs spread. So sharing plants can move their eggs. So sometimes taking things down to bare root can help. And if you're visiting a natural area, clean your shoes and gear between sites. So if you're hiking, this can be as simple as using a boot brush station or keeping a brush in your vehicle. And report sightings. Stay up to date on invasive species in your area. Report sightings to landowners, Illinois Extension. And there's this cool online mapping tool called EdMaps, EDD Maps. And it's a great way to both see what exists in the areas you're going to be in, as well as report them. And you can also volunteer to help remove invasive species at a local natural area. In general, don't move firewood. So if you're camping, make sure you get your firewood locally. Don't harvest plants such as roadside weeds if you don't know what they are. It's also maybe illegal to remove plants from property that you do not own. Don't release exotic plants, pests, or pets. The number of people who seem to think they can just take a turtle and let it go always astounds me. Don't bring food when traveling. Fruits and vegetables can harbor pests and diseases that we don't want moving from place to place, or they can contain viable seeds that can grow and spread. And keep an eye on your vehicles for hitchhikers. Spotted lanternfly is known to lay eggs on just about anything, including vehicles and trailers. Immediately destroy any egg masses you find trying to hitch a ride from the east. And you can view past recordings of Four Seasons Gardening Series on YouTube. There is the link there. And if you would be so kind, you can please take this brief survey for me and let me know what you thought about today's webinar. There's my information on there. If you want to reach out to me as well, I can provide you with some resources